Welcome to the deep dive. We're going deep into the human brain today,
Oh, wow.
the
Yeah.
most complex thing probably in the known
It's
universe.
incredible.
And we're going to be using the Wikipedia article on neuroscience as our guide.
Perfect.
And it covers a lot. Ancient theories of the brain, modern discoveries, even, career paths if you're thinking about getting into the field.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so why don't we just jump right in? What is neuroscience exactly? What makes it so special, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, at its core, neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system, right?
Okay.
And that includes the brain, the spinal cord, all the nerves that run throughout your body.
Right.
But what's really cool about it is it's not just one field.
Mm-hmm.
It brings together all these different disciplines like biology, psychology, chemistry, even computer science these days.
Oh, wow.
So it's really this like interdisciplinary approach to understanding this, incredibly complex organ.
So a team effort.
Yeah, exactly. And, even with all that brain power combined, understanding the brain is still a huge challenge.
I bet.
Nobel laureate Eric Kandel called it the epic challenge.
I like that.
And he's not wrong. We're talking about unraveling the mysteries of consciousness, learning, memory, behavior, perception, everything that makes you you.
Yeah, that's a pretty tall order, I'd say.
Sure.
But humans have been, fascinated with this thing
Yes.
for millennia.
Absolutely.
So let's go way back in time, like ancient civilizations. What were some of their theories about the brain?
Okay, so you got to go back to the ancient Egyptians. They practiced something called trepanation.
Trepanation.
Yeah, it's where they would drill holes in skulls.
Okay, that's a little scary.
Right. It's pretty intense, but they believed it could cure ailments like headaches or seizures.
So they were doing, brain surgery, essentially.
In a way, yeah.
Wild.
But here's the thing. They didn't actually believe the brain was the seat of intelligence or the soul.
Really?
They thought it was the heart.
Interesting. So what was the brain to them then?
They called it, get this, cranial stuffing.
Cranial stuffing.
I know, right? And during mummification, they would actually remove the brain through the nose.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
It's pretty wild.
But that's so interesting that they valued the heart over the brain.
Yeah, and it makes sense from their perspective.
I guess so.
They observed that emotions made your heart race, so they connected it to thought and consciousness.
Right, right.
But around the same time, you had the Greek physician Hippocrates, and he was challenging that heart-centric view.
Oh.
He was a very astute observer, noticed that head injuries often led to changes in behavior and mental abilities, and so he proposed this radical idea
What was that?
that the brain was actually the seat of sensation and intelligence.
I mean, that's a pretty big jump to make.
It was groundbreaking for the time, absolutely.
So how did that idea catch on?
Well, it took a few centuries.
Right.
But then you have Galen, another Greek physician. He was a surgeon for gladiators.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine he got to see a lot of head injuries.
Yeah. A little grim, but yeah.
Definitely. But it gave him this unique perspective.
Mhm.
And through his work, he was able to confirm that the brain controlled movement, sensation, and thought.
So really building on what Hippocrates started.
Yeah, he even went as far as to identify different parts of the brain responsible for different functions,
Right.
which was like a huge step forward.
Yes, starting to map the brain out.
Absolutely.
So we're slowly but surely getting a better understanding
Yeah,
as time goes on.
totally.
So fast forward a few more centuries, where do we land?
Okay, so now we're in the 19th century, and we have Camillo Golgi.
Gold.
He's an Italian physician, scientist, and he develops this groundbreaking staining technique using silver chromate.
Okay.
It allowed scientists to see individual neurons under a microscope for the first time.
Wow. So we can actually see them now.
It was a game changer.
So it's like before we were just looking at a big blob, and now we can see all the little pieces.
Exactly. And then a Spanish neuroscientist, Santiago Ramon y Cajal, takes Golgi's technique and he runs with it, really maps the structure of the nervous system.
Wow.
And he proposes the neuron doctrine, which basically says that the neuron is the fundamental unit of the brain.
The building block.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And, their work was so revolutionary, they both shared the Nobel Prize in 1906.
So a dynamic duo.
They were?
So we're seeing them under the microscope now.
Oh.
But did they figure out what specific parts of the brain did?
Yeah. So in the 1860s, you have Paul Broca,
Okay.
a French physician, and he's studying patients with language difficulties.
Yep.
And he notices that damage to a very specific area in the left frontal lobe always seems to lead to problems with speech production.
Interesting.
That area became known as, you guessed it, Broca's area.
Yeah.
And it was some of the first hard evidence that different brain regions had specialized functions.
Like a little map.
Yeah, like a map of the brain.
So each part has its own specific job.
Right.
And this idea, it's called localization of function, right?
Exactly.
Like a cornerstone of neuroscience.
It is.
So we're starting to understand how the brain works, like at a deeper level now.
Yes. It's all starting to come together.
This is incredible. I feel like we've traveled through, like, centuries of brain research in just a few minutes.
We have.
But I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Right.
There's so much more to come, especially with the advancements of the 20th and 21st centuries.
I can only imagine.
We'll dive into that next.
Can't wait.
So we've been traveling back in time looking at some of these early discoveries in neuroscience.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how far we've come, from trepanation
Absolutely.
to actually, mapping out the brain.
Yeah.
But I want to jump ahead now
Okay.
to like the 20th, 21st century. What are some of the like big breakthroughs that really revolutionized our understanding of the brain?
Well, I think one of the biggest has been the development of new technologies that let us study the brain in ways we just, couldn't even imagine before.
Right.
Like electrophysiology, for example.
Right.
It allows us to actually measure the electrical activity of individual neurons.
So we can like eavesdrop on brain cells talking to each other.
Yeah, kind of. It's like listening in on the language of the brain.
Wow, that's incredible. But how do you even measure something that tiny? I mean, the electrical signal of a single neuron.
Well, it involves using these super fine electrodes. Some of them are even thinner than a human hair.
Wow.
And we use them to detect those tiny electrical impulses.
Okay.
And then over time, we've developed these sophisticated amplifiers and recording equipment so we can amplify those signals and study them in detail.
So what have we learned from, listening to these neural conversations?
Oh, so much. We now understand how neurons communicate, using electrical and chemical signals.
Okay. We know how they form these intricate networks and circuits, and ultimately how those circuits give rise to, well, everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Our senses, our movements, our thoughts, our emotions, even.
It's like the brain is this like massive communication network. We keep talking about neurons.
Yeah.
But I remember from school that there are other types of cells in the brain too.
Yes. You're thinking of glial cells.
Real cells, yeah.
For a long time, they were thought to be just kind of like support cells.
Oh, okay.
Providing structure, nutrients to neurons. But now research is showing that glial cells are way more active in brain function than we ever realized.
Oh, really? What do they do?
Well, they regulate neuronal communication, for one thing.
Okay.
They maintain the chemical environment of the brain.
Interesting.
They even play a role in the brain's immune responses.
Wow, so it's like a whole ecosystem in there.
It really is.
Not just neurons doing their thing.
Definitely a team effort. That's really cool. So we've got these amazing tools to study the brain now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find so fascinating is molecular biology. Like being able to study the genes, the molecules that make up brain cells.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah. It's like we can really zoom in and see how it all works at the tiniest level.
Exactly. And one of the most, I think, surprising things that's come out of molecular neuroscience is that humans and mice actually share the same fundamental types of cells in their brains.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that, like, my brain has the same basic building blocks as a mouse brain?
Well, yeah, but with some key differences, of course.
Okay.
It's kind of like different models of the same car.
Okay.
The basic structure is the same, but the features, the performance, those vary.
Right.
And in the brain, the variations are in the specific genes and molecules that are expressed in each cell type.
Interesting.
And those variations, they lead to differences in how those cells function, how they connect with each other.
So while we might share the same, like, cellular blueprints with mice,
Yeah.
our brains are wired differently, which makes us, uniquely human.
Precisely. And this has huge implications for things like understanding brain diseases.
Oh, how so?
Well, by studying those cellular and molecular differences between species, we can gain insights into why certain diseases, like Alzheimer's, affect humans but not mice, and vice versa.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's like having this whole new way to study the brain and its, like, complexities.
It is. It's a new lens.
So with all these amazing discoveries, what are some of the frontiers in neuroscience? Like, what are researchers most excited about right now?
I'd say one area that's really generating a lot of buzz is computational neuroscience.
Okay, what is that?
It uses mathematical models, computer simulations, to understand how these large networks of neurons interact.
So we're like creating a virtual brain in a computer.
Kinda, yeah. And by tweaking those models and running simulations, researchers can test different theories about how the brain works, and even make predictions about how the brain might respond to certain stimuli or interventions.
Wow, so it's this powerful tool for understanding the brain's computational power.
Exactly.
This is really cool. It's like we're getting this glimpse into the inner workings of the brain through technology.
It is.
But with all this talk about technology and computation, I'm also wondering about the human side of neuroscience. Like, how do we understand how the brain gives rise to thoughts, emotions, experiences?
You're talking about cognitive and behavioral neuroscience.
Right, yeah.
This field is all about figuring out the neural mechanisms that underlie our higher level cognitive functions, things like language, memory, attention, decision-making.
Even consciousness.
Even consciousness, yeah.
That's like the ultimate mystery, right? How do
Yeah.
we even study something like consciousness?
It is a huge challenge,
Yeah.
but researchers are making progress. One approach is to use neuroimaging techniques like fMRI to actually see which brain regions are active when people are doing different mental tasks or experiencing different emotions.
Okay.
And by correlating brain activity with those subjective experiences, we can start to piece together how the brain creates the mind.
It's like watching the brain light up as we think and feel.
It really is.
What about memory? That's always been something that's fascinated me. Like, how does our brain store and retrieve memories?
Well, one of the biggest surprises is that memory is not just this passive recording device. It's not like a video camera.
Right.
It's much more dynamic, much more constructive.
Oh, interesting.
Every time you recall a memory, you're actually reconstructing it.
Oh, wow.
You're pulling together different fragments of information and weaving them into this coherent narrative.
So our memories aren't necessarily accurate representations of the past?
That's right. They can be influenced by our current thoughts, feeling, beliefs even.
So it's more like our brain's interpretation of what happened.
Exactly. Which explains why eyewitness testimony, for example, can be so unreliable.
Right.
Our memories aren't always a perfect reflection of reality, but rather our brain's best attempt to make sense of what happened based on the information it has.
Wow, this is kind of mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it?
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own memories.
And that's what I love about neuroscience.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think differently about ourselves and the world.
Absolutely. There's one more area of neuroscience I want to touch on before we move on.
Okay.
And that's the ethical implications of all these advancements. We're not just talking about scientific discoveries anymore.
Right.
We're talking about how those discoveries impact society,
For sure.
what it means to be human.
Absolutely.
Like, think about neurotechnology, brain-computer interfaces, for example.
There's so much potential there.
Right. We could be on the verge of being able to, like, directly interact with the brain, alter it even, which is both, you know, incredibly exciting and a little bit scary.
It is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? Who gets to decide how these technologies are used?
These are big questions.
And it's not just neurotechnology.
Right?
Think about the legal system. What if we can identify brain abnormalities that might make someone more likely to commit a crime?
Yeah,
How does that affect our ideas of responsibility?
that's a tough one.
These are really deep philosophical questions that neuroscience is forcing us to grapple with.
It is, and I think it's crucial that we have these conversations now
Yeah.
while these technologies are still being developed so
Yeah.
we can establish ethical guidelines
Yes,
and
sir.
ensure that these advancements are used responsibly
Right, completely.
for the benefit of humanity.
Well said. This has been an incredibly enlightening journey so far.
It has.
I feel like I'm already taking notes in my head
Oh, good.
so I can go back and like re-listen to all of this.
There's a lot to unpack.
But before we wrap up this part, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners about like the future of neuroscience?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the brain isn't static.
Okay.
It's constantly changing, adapting throughout our lives.
We call that neuroplasticity, right?
Exactly.
So we're not just stuck with the brain we're born with.
Nope. We have the power to shape and mold our brains through our experiences, our thoughts, our actions.
So it's not just nature, it's nurture too.
Exactly.
That's an empowering thought. It means that things like education, social interaction, our diet, exercise, they can all play a role in shaping our brains and our cognitive abilities.
Absolutely. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the brain, I have no doubt that we'll discover even more ways to harness its incredible potential
That's exciting. It's like the possibilities are endless.
and create a future where everyone can thrive cognitively.
I love that. So as we move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Yes.
I want to encourage our listeners to keep exploring this amazing world of neuroscience.
Me too.
Read books, watch documentaries, have conversations about the brain.
It's such a fascinating topic.
Because the more we learn about this incredible organ, the more we learn about ourselves and our place in the universe.
Well said. And remember, the brain is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So let's all give our brains a good workout. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I feel like we could talk about the brain for, hours.
Oh, easily.
There's just so much to explore,
Yeah, it's a never-ending journey, but I think even with just this little glimpse, you can really see how understanding the brain can change your perspective on, how you learn, how you remember things,
Absolutely.
how you even experience the world.
Yeah. It's really amazing to see how far we've come. We started talking about ancient Egyptians pulling brains out through their noses.
Oh, yeah, those early days.
And now, we're talking about mapping neural networks with computers.
It's come a long way.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has. But through it all, what really stands out to me is just how interconnected everything is.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Like we talked about the different disciplines within neuroscience,
Yeah.
but it goes even beyond that, right?
It does.
Like the brain itself is this interconnected web with all these different regions and functions constantly talking to each other.
It's true. Different parts of the brain are constantly interacting, influencing each other.
So it's not enough to just understand the individual parts. We have to understand how they all work together.
Yeah, it's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
And that interconnectedness, it goes beyond the brain too, right? Like our brains are constantly interacting with our environment.
Oh, definitely.
Taking in information through our senses, shaping our thoughts and behaviors, even influencing how we perceive the world.
Yeah, it's this constant back and forth, this incredible feedback loop between the brain, the body, and the environment.
That's really cool. And it brings us back to this concept of neuroplasticity,
Yes, neuroplasticity.
which we talked about a little bit earlier. This amazing ability of the brain to change and adapt throughout our lives.
Based on our experiences.
Yeah, it's not like we're just stuck with a fixed brain from birth.
Right, not at all.
We have the power to shape and mold our own brains through our actions, our experiences.
That's the beauty of it, You have more control over your brain than you might think.
It's a really empowering thought, actually.
It is.
So like every time I try to learn a new language or pick up a new hobby, I'm actually changing the physical structure of my brain.
You are. You're literally rewiring your brain, strengthening certain connections, weakening others.
Wow. So what are some things that people can do to harness this power of neuroplasticity and keep their brains healthy?
Well, one of the most important things is to just keep learning throughout your life.
Okay, so going back to school.
It doesn't have to be formal education.
Okay.
It's just about finding things that challenge you mentally, keep you engaged.
Like brain games.
Those can be helpful, but also things like reading, learning a new language, playing a musical instrument.
Oh yeah, so it's about staying curious.
Exactly.
Challenging yourself, don't let the brain get lazy.
Keep it active, keep it engaged.
What about diet and exercise? Do those play a role in brain health?
Oh, absolutely. Your brain needs nutritious food, just like your body does.
Okay.
So a balanced diet, lots of fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, those are all important.
So I guess that whole food for thought thing is actually true.
It really is. And regular exercise, that's huge.
Okay, why is that?
Well, it improves blood flow to the brain,
Okay.
stimulates the growth of new brain cells,
All right.
even helps protect against cognitive decline.
So taking care of our physical health is just as important for our brain as it is for the rest of our body.
Exactly. It's all connected.
It really is. What about things like stress and sleep? Do those affect the brain too?
For sure. Chronic stress is actually really bad for your brain.
Okay.
It can damage brain cells, impair cognitive function.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that serious.
Yeah, so finding healthy ways to manage stress.
Like what?
Meditation, yoga, spending time in nature, those are all great.
Right. Things that help you relax.
Exactly. And sleep, well, that's when your brain does all its maintenance work.
Okay.
Consolidating memories, clearing out toxins, basically recharging for the next day.
So we really need to prioritize sleep.
Definitely. It's essential for brain health.
So basically, everything we do,
Yeah.
what we eat, how we move, how we manage stress, how much we sleep, it all has an impact on our brain.
It's all interconnected. It all matters.
This has been such an incredible deep dive into the world of neuroscience.
It has been fun.
I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm glad.
It's really amazing to think about this incredible organ that controls everything we do.
It is pretty amazing.
But as we wrap up, is there like one final takeaway message you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that your brain is dynamic. It's always evolving. You have more control over your brain health and your cognitive abilities than you might realize.
Right. Like we've been saying, it's not set in stone.
Exactly. So make healthy choices, challenge yourself mentally, stay curious about the world.
Keep learning.
Yes, keep learning, and you can really unlock your brain's full potential.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey into the brain.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been a real mind-expanding experience. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains active. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.